Internal cable routing is not a modern innovation. Sure, it's become commonplace in recent years to make bikes look more slick, but it's been around for close to 50 years now. Personally, I've been fishing cables out of bikes for over 30 years and replacing them. I've seen a lot of ideas on the internet and YouTube on how to get cables through bike tubes or through frame. I've tried most of them because it's such a nasty job, and as a professional bike technician, I need to know the easiest and cost-effective and most efficient way to do it. I'm going to show you the easiest ways I know of and the least stressful way if you get it wrong. If you get it wrong, it'll be like starting to build a bike from scratch. So you could also use this tutorial if you're just building a bike from the ground up. There are a lot of tips all the way through, so you're going to want to watch the whole video to make it as easy as it can be. At the end, I'm going to show you a top tip that I stumbled on a few years ago that'll mean that you won't have to change your rear gear cables as often as you otherwise would do. So buckle your toe straps and let's get straight into it. You've just got to become the bike. So the tools you're going to need to do this job successfully are some thin picture frame cord. This is for hanging pictures up on a wall. I'm guessing this is about 2 mil thick. This is the one I found works the best. Maybe a thicker picture cord. I guess this one's about 3, maybe 4 mil. You know, if you've got holes that are big enough where the cables go into the frame, then that might work as well. Some dental floss, an old bit of gear cable. And you can see this one here has got the end bent over on it. That's basically to make it stick inside the gear liner better, so you can put it through the bike. An old spoke, you should have one of these in your pot on your bench anyway for just getting things out of stuff. A bradawl or an awl to poke the liner out when you cut it to length, just so you can get the cable back through it where it's been crimped. A pair of side cutters, so you can cut the liner with when you're running it through the bike. A set of cable cutters, bike cable cutters. This is really just so that you can reshape the end of the liner when you've cut it and it's crimped down just before you poke an awl in it. You're going to need these anyway, just so you can cut the cables. Some insulation tape. 2 bits of gear liner, so like a short one here, so you can just do short runs, like say through the rear chainstay, and a long one here, so that you can go through the whole length of the bike if you need to. Now for me, these are just tools. I don't use these to actually run liners unless I really have to. So I use brake cable liner because it's thicker in the inside, and so it makes the cables run through it much smoother. The Park IR I.2 tool, you might want to use this to try and get cables through the frame using magnetism. I don't think it's as good as the other ways I'm going to show you. Sometimes I do use it because it's necessary. If you're not doing this all the time, it's quite an expensive tool to get just to fit a cable through a bike 1 or 2 times. A hacksaw, in case you really get fed up with the whole thing and you just want to chop the frame up. A pair of scissors, so you can cut a plastic bag up, and an old plastic bag which you can cut up into bits, and a good quality friendly hoover. Now if you haven't pulled your cable out of the bike, you're probably not going to need most of those tools. The most important part here is not to pull the cable out of the bike and just leave the bike with no cables in it whatsoever. And one other thing I've used before in the past when I got really stuck, because sometimes you just need to use your imagination to get the cables through the bike, is an old gear cable taped to a bit of electrical cable, because it's nice and stiff and you can push it through the bike without it getting all coiled up in there. If that wasn't successful with the tape, I would just solder it on. As you can see here, the internal cable liners on the inners here are a little bit damaged, so I'm just going to take them off and replace them. But while I'm at it, I thought I'd just show you how to change an internal gear cable. I'm going to show you the right way to do it, which is the easy way, and then I'm going to show you the difficult way to do it if you've pulled the cable out and you're left with nothing in the bike. The first thing I'm going to do is remove the bottom bracket guide for the cables. Then it's out of our way and there's a lot more room to work around because there's not much room to do this job anyway. So I'm going to take the cable guide off, and then I'm going to take the front cable out of the cable guide. I'm not going to do them both at once because I don't want to get the cables mixed up and maybe get them twisted in the frame and cause problems later on. We'll get that cable out of the guide, and then I'm going to just tape that to the left-hand chainstay. And I'm not just going to use like a little bit of tape because the frame itself might have some sort of grease or residue on it. You might have some on your hands, you know, you might get some grease on it later on, and that will mean that the tape may well come off and you can end up losing the cable into the frame. So I'm going to wrap it right around the tube. You might find that you have to snip the crimp part of the cable off where it's been underneath the pinch bolt just to get it through the liners, but also so it's easier to get out through the frame itself. Now you've snipped the damaged bit of cable from the pinch bolt off the rear cable, you want to take the cable guide off, take the liner off, and then what you want to do is get the other piece of liner that you're going to use to run through the bike and start to feed the inner cable into it. Now I feed it in as far as I can until you basically get inside the bike and you can't feed it in any further, because that gives you the best chance of it not being pulled out of the liner as it's going through the bike. Bend the end of the cable over, and that way it'll just stay in there a little bit more firmly. I'm going to go back to the front of the bike, pull the outer casing out of the slot or the housing that it's in, slowly pull it out of the bike, grab the other end of the liner where it's going into the bike, and just make sure it's moving while the inner's being pulled out, because if it's not, all you're doing is dragging it out of the bike on its own. So you just want to like give that a little bit of a push to make sure that it comes out of the frame and you've got the liner coming out as well as just the inner cable. Once the liner's out, you want to get some insulation tape again. You want to wrap it right round the tube and secure the liner to the actual tube so it's not going to come off, because if it does come off and drops down into the frame, you're going to be a very, very sad person. Make sure that the liner that you've got left at the bottom of the bike is somewhere safe and or secured to the bike, again with some tape wrapped around the tube, and that way it won't just get dragged right up through the bike at some point. Even if it goes in the bottom, it's going to cause you problems getting it back out. The next thing I'm going to do with the shifters on this bike is roll the brake hood back, and I'm doing that because the cable comes out through the side of the shifter. Then I'm going to get the inner cable and I'm going to push it in through the outer cable, and as I do that, you'll see that there's a little panel on the side of the shifter, and that should just pop open. I mean, if it doesn't really matter, but what you want to do is then remove the cable from the outer housing, and then you want to just like push it out the outside of the shifter. Now we're going to get the new inner cable through the shifter and make sure the little panel is open on the inside of the shifter. And you just poke the cable through a little bit, just, maybe like a couple of centimeters or something like that. And then you want to just get the cable and feed it into the outer cable, which is underneath the handlebar tape. The reason you want to do this now is because you'll probably get a little kink in the cable when you bend it over to get it inside the outer housing, and you don't want that to be somewhere like halfway down the cable, because that will just cause you trouble with the indexing later on. Now I'll push the cable through the outer housing and the shifter until it just pops out the end of the actual outer housing where it would normally go into the front of the bike. And then I'll just grease up what's left of the inner cable that's still outside the shifter, and then I'll just drag that through. Now if you want to see how to fit a cable completely from start to finish, I've got a video on that, and I'll just put that in the link down below. Once you've pulled the cable all the way through the shifter, put the little cover on the inside of the shifter, and then you want to just roll the hood back on. And then you just want to get the end of your inner cable, feed that into the liner at the front of the bike near the head tube or the down tube or whatever you've strapped it to, and just keep pushing it all the way through until it starts to come out of the liner down the bottom of the bike. And once that's sort of come out, you can just undo the actual liner. Once you've removed the tape from the frame, you want to just start to push the inner cable and the liner into the bike and slowly pull it down the bottom of the bike, and making sure that you're not just pulling the actual liner out and you're not dragging the inner through with it, because you don't want to get the inner lost on its own in the frame halfway through. So once you've got the inner cable out of the bottom of the bike, you want to just secure it somewhere, because if you need to turn the bike upside down, you might find that actually the cable just drops back in the bike and you're back to where you started. In fact, you're back to worse than where you started. This will also help keep you out of the way while I show you with the front gear cable how I'm going to do it without having the cable in there in the first place. You really don't want to get these cables crossed up inside the frame, because they'll just be tugging on each other and the gears will never work properly. Now we've done it the correct easy way, I'm going to show you what to do if you've gone and pulled the cable out and you end up with no cable in there to help you feed the liners through and then the cables back through them. Hopefully you haven't done that, but if you have, or you're just building the bike from new, this is a good way to do it. So you want to get your picture frame cord, get the thickest piece you can that'll go through the bike. I'm using this thinner one here. You basically feed it into the hole in the down tube or whatever tube it is, and try and use gravity with you as well here. So, where you're trying to get to, have that lower than where you're going into. And then you want to secure it somewhere, say around the handlebars, so that it doesn't end up disappearing into the frame at some point while you're trying to do this. Now it's time to get our trusty workshop hoover out, Henri, and we basically just want to get a wide fitting and put it over the hole where it's coming out. And if you need to cover a bit of that up with your hand to make it suck better, do that. And as you can see here, we've been quite lucky. The cord's come straight out. What I'm going to do now, bit of a glutton for punishment, is I'm going to just pull that cord straight out, and I'm going to start again, and I'm going to show you another way to do it. So what I'm going to do is get a bit of a carrier bag and basically roll that around a nozzle off a spray can, and then I'm just going to get as much of that as I can, make it as thick as I can, so I can still get it through the hole in the frame. What that's going to do when we tie the picture frame cord to it is it's going to allow the vacuum to suck the cord much easier, and hopefully that'll get it out for you. This is hardly ever as easy as I've made it look the first time. So you want to actually take note of this and try this out if you get stuck. Okay, so that didn't work because I couldn't get the plastic bag and the picture frame cord into the hole at the same time because the hole's so small. So what I'm going to do now is get some dental floss and try the same thing. So I've poked the plastic bag into the frame so there's still a bit sticking out, and I've got the dental floss and I'm just tying it around the end of the bag there. Try not to make too much of a big knot because there's not much room in that little hole that's going into the frame. And then I'm just trying to poke this into the frame so that it disappears. What I've done is I've cut the bag and the dental floss back as far as I can close to the knot, so there really is as little as possible going through that hole. Get the hoover like I did with the picture frame cord, and I'm just going to hold it underneath the bottom bracket where the cable needs to come out. And as you can see, the dental floss is getting sucked straight down. Now that might not have happened if you hadn't put a little bit of plastic bag on there. I did try it before with a bit of dental floss and it just wouldn't come out. It kind of just got stuck somewhere in the frame. Because we tied the dental floss around a little bit of bag, that it's just sucked out of the tube first time. So now what I'm going to do is tie the dental floss to the picture frame cord that I had. I'm just going to double over the picture cord frame so it does actually go into the frame in a tiny hole, much easier. So I'm just going to pull that all the way through so the picture frame cord runs all the way down out the bottom of the bike. So now that I've got the picture cord through the frame, what I'm going to do is get the old bit of gear cable I've got with no ends on it, and I'm just going to tape that to the picture cord, and I'm going to just pull that through the bike. Now you don't want to use too much tape for a hole the size I've got because it just won't get through it. I did try, I can assure you. And then just pull that through from the bottom of the bike, but while you're doing that you want to just push the inner cable in through the frame so you're not actually getting to a point where you're pulling the cord away from the cable. Now what we're going to do is start to push the liner down through the frame, and at the same time pull it from the bottom bracket so that it pulls through the frame without pulling out of the liner. Now the liner's all the way through the bike. You just want to secure that to the chainstay where you've just had the old bit of cable secured, and now we're ready to get the new cable fitted through the shifter, through the outer housing, and then back through the frame. Now wasn't that easy? Obviously this is just the same way as we did earlier on in the video where we put the rear cable in. You just want to get that down in through the bike, and then once you've got that through, I'm just going to fit the new liners on the inner cables that go inside the frame and through the cable guide, fit them through the cable guide, and then we're ready to fit the parts of the bike. Now you'll note that I haven't fitted any parts of the bike like the derailleurs or the chain set because I want this to be as easy as possible. I don't want them to get in my way, I don't want to whack my hands on them, I want to be able to see, I want to be able to get the hoover in there. There's lots of reasons why you want to do this first. And if you're building a bike these days where the cables go round the bottom bracket inside the bike, then you want to do the cables before you fit anything else to the bike because it'll give you the most amount of access, and you won't have to strip your bike down to actually get the cables through properly. So earlier on I promised you a top tip, and here it is. This is basically for Shimano derailleurs, like the new Shadow ones, where the cable goes round the back of the derailleur. Now Shimano tell you to cut them off at something like 2.5 or 3 centimeters, and that's basically so it doesn't go in the wheel when you're up on the big cog. The problem with that is that you end up with a really short bit of cable left, and then when you come to service the bike or have to have the cable out for something, you haven't really got enough to pull the cable tight. So what we worked out is that you can actually leave the cable a bit longer, like about 6 centimeters, and then what you can do is get it up into the back of the cage where they've got some little holes drilled, and that will just sit there and be out of the way, and then when you come to service the bike next time you'll be able to access it, snip the end off, and still have enough cable left to not have to replace it just because you're doing something that had actually nothing to do with replacing the cables. Once you've got the end of the cable in place in the back of the derailleur and you operate the derailleur, it doesn't foul on anything at all, so it's just nicely tucked away. Now, if you feel like you're getting any benefit from this video, please smack the like button down the bottom and share it with anyone that you think might benefit from it. So let's look now how you get a inner cable back through the bike when it's in the rear chainstay, especially if you've actually pulled it out. So the first we want to do is get the little end ferrule out of the end of the frame where the cable comes out. And then we just want to feed the inner cable through until we can get it out through the bottom bracket shell. And once you've done that, you want to get the liner, the gear cable liner, and then just slide that onto the end of what you've got sticking out the end of the chainstay, and then just slowly drag it through, pulling the inner cable through the bottom bracket shell. At the same time, you want to push the actual gear cable liner through the chainstay as well. And once you've got the liner all the way through, you can just pull the cable off that. It's a good idea, like earlier in the video, once you've got the actual liner through and you've got the actual ferrule back over the liner, to secure it somehow so it doesn't just get pulled back through the frame. So where we've just cut this piece of liner off that we're going to use, you can see that it's actually crimped the end right down. So again, you just want to get your cable cutters and just use a little hole on the inside of the handles and just reshape that. And if you need to, just get your bradawl or your awl and just poke the end out so it's nice and round again to allow the cable to slide through nicely. I always use brake cable liner for gear cables because it's got a wider internal diameter. It'll make the inner cable slide through easier, giving you much slicker shifting for a much longer time. So now we're going to get the liners fitted down through the down tube. So you can see here I'm just trying to poke the liner through just to show you that it won't go through, because what happens is it kind of gets snagged inside usually and it just coils up, and so you're pushing it and it's just bagging up inside. So the best way to do it is get the old bit of inner cable, with both the ends cut off it, slide that down through, and because that's nice and stiff, it should just go all the way through, no problem. And then once you've got it all the way through and out the port in the bottom, you then just want to get a liner on the end of the cable and or bend the end of the cable over so it grips in there better, and then drag the inner cable through the frame from the bottom while you're actually feeding the liner in through from the top. You can see that I've just had to pop this port off on the bottom of the bottom bracket to give the cable access to get out. Sometimes that might actually be a cable guide. So if your bike doesn't run cable through the chainstay and it's just going down through the down tube and you've got cable guides at the bottom there, you're pretty much done. So you've got to just now fit your inner cable through the shifter and through the outer cable at the front of the bike, and then down through the liner that we've put in the frame, and then put your cable guides on and link it up to your rear derailleur or your front derailleur. So if you've got an inner cable that runs all the way from the front of the bike through the down tube and then down through the chainstay to go to the rear derailleur, you're going to have to combine these two jobs together. The best way I've found to do that is to run your inner cable from the front of the bike down through the down tube and into the bottom bracket shell, and just bring it out the side, and then with your long bit of inner liner, come in through the back of the chainstay and run it down through the port so it comes out the bottom bracket shell, and then connect it up there, and then slowly, because it's going to be running around a few different corners, push the liner through and ease it up with the inner cable till you get it back to the front of the bike. So once you've got the liner out of the port at the front of the bike, you want to secure it to the frame so it doesn't just slide back in again, and you're ready to fit your gear cables. So I'd just like to know what your aha moment was. You can just leave it in the comments below.